Most people believe they are living their life. They believe they make decisions. They believe they respond to circumstances. They believe their future is shaped by effort, intelligence, and opportunity. But if that were true, something wouldn't make sense. Because if people were truly free to choose, they wouldn't keep repeating the same patterns. They wouldn't sabotage the same opportunities. They wouldn't end up in the same emotional situations with different faces. They wouldn't promise themselves change, and then quietly slide back into what feels familiar. Yet that is exactly what happens. Not occasionally, but structurally. And most people blame themselves for it. They think they lack discipline. They think they are inconsistent. They think they're lazy, fearful, unmotivated, or broken in some subtle way. But what if none of that is true? What if the reason your life keeps circling the same territory has nothing to do with willpower at all? What if the real driver of your behavior is something you almost never question? Something so close to you that you mistake it for who you are? Because there is a difference between who you are and the image your brain is operating from. And most people live their entire life from that image without ever realizing it. Think about how often you say things like, "This is just how I am. I've always been like this. I'm not the type of person who, I'm not someone who." Those sentences feel harmless. Honest, even. But neurologically, they are instructions. They tell your brain what to protect, what to allow, what to block, what to correct. Your brain doesn't ask whether those statements are true. It only asks whether they are familiar. Because familiarity equals safety. This is why people often feel uncomfortable when life starts to improve. Why success can feel strangely threatening. Why peace can feel boring. Why stability can feel wrong. Not because something is missing, but because something is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe to the nervous system. So the brain intervenes. Quietly. You hesitate. You overthink. You procrastinate. You downplay. You distract yourself. You suddenly lose motivation. From the outside, it looks like self-sabotage. From the inside, it feels like confusion. But from the brain's perspective, it's correction. The system is simply bringing you back in line with the image it trusts. This is why effort-based change is exhausting. You can force yourself for a while. You can push. You can discipline. You can override. But eventually, something pulls you back. Because behavior does not sit at the top of the system. Identity does. And here's the uncomfortable part most people don't want to look at. You are not living according to what is possible. You are living according to what feels allowed. Allowed by whom? By the image your brain has of you. That image determines how much success feels normal, how much love feels safe, how much visibility feels tolerable, how much ease feels suspicious. And that image is not conscious. It was built slowly, quietly, through repetition, emotional memory, and interpretation. This is why two people can live through the same experience and come away with completely different conclusions. One thinks, "I handled that well." The other thinks, "I messed everything up." One thinks, "This is an opportunity." The other thinks, "This is risky." One feels energized. The other feels drained. Same event, different internal mirror. Because you don't experience the world as it is. You experience the world as it confirms who you believe you are. This is not philosophy. This is how predictive systems work. Your brain is constantly predicting who you are, and then filtering reality to match that prediction. It deletes information that doesn't fit. It distorts neutral signals. It highlights confirming evidence. Not to hurt you, but to keep you consistent. Consistency is safety. And this explains something many people quietly suffer from. The feeling of being capable of more, but never quite accessing it. The feeling of knowing better, but still doing the same things. the feeling of growth that never stabilizes. That's not failure. That's identity inertia. And this is where a crucial discovery was made. Not in neuroscience labs, not in therapy rooms, but in a place no one expected. A surgical practice. Decades ago, a physician noticed something that didn't make sense. Patients whose physical appearance had dramatically changed did not always change internally. And patients whose appearance barely changed sometimes transformed completely. Externally, nothing explained it. Internally, everything did. That physician eventually gave this phenomenon a name. He called it the self-image. Not as a metaphor, but as a functional system. He observed that human behavior is regulated by an internal picture of the self, and that this picture acts like a set point. Just like a thermostat regulates temperature, the self-image regulates behavior. When life moves above or below that set point, the system corrects. Not consciously, automatically. This is why people return to old habits. Why confidence collapses after progress. Why people feel uncomfortable being seen differently than they see themselves. The system is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect identity continuity. And here's the key insight that most people miss. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a real experience and a vividly imagined one. To the nervous system, imagination is data. Every time you replay a moment of failure, rejection, embarrassment, or "this is who I am," you are reinforcing the image the system is protecting. You are feeding the mirror. This is why people who constantly analyze themselves often feel stuck. They are strengthening the very image they want to escape. Change does not begin with behavior. It begins with updating the mirror. When the mirror changes, behavior follows automatically. Not through force, through alignment. This is why some people seem to change effortlessly while others struggle endlessly. They are not stronger. They are not smarter. They are operating from a different self-image. And once the brain accepts a new image as safe, everything reorganizes around it. Perception shifts. Choices feel easier. Opportunities no longer feel threatening. Not because the world changed, but because the internal reference point did. In the next part of this video, we'll go deeper into how this self-image forms, how it becomes neurologically reinforced, and how people unknowingly keep it locked in place, even while trying to change. Because once you understand how the mirror is built, you stop fighting yourself. And that's when real change becomes possible. Most people don't realize how often they are unconsciously reinforcing the very identity they want to escape. Not because they want to stay stuck, but because the brain seeks confirmation. Take something as simple as a normal workday. Someone wakes up already slightly tense. Not because something happened, but because tension feels familiar. They check their phone, scan their inbox, and immediately notice the one message that feels demanding or critical. 10 neutral messages pass unnoticed. One mildly stressful signal gets amplified. And without realizing it, the internal story continues. Here we go again. This is always how it is. I never get a break. Nothing dramatic happened. But the self-image was confirmed. The brain doesn't care whether the story is fair. It only cares whether it is consistent. Now look at relationships. Someone whose self-image includes, "I'm too much" or "I'm not really chosen," will unconsciously scan for micro-signals of distance. A delayed response. A neutral tone. A distracted moment. None of these mean rejection on their own, but the brain connects the dots in a way that matches the image it trusts. So the person withdraws, or becomes anxious, or over-explains, or tests the connection. And then when tension arises, the brain concludes, "See, this always happens." From the outside, it looks like emotional reactivity. From the inside, it feels like self-protection. But what's really happening is identity confirmation. The same applies to money. People who believe money is stressful don't just experience stress when money is low. They often experience it when money improves. They feel uneasy with abundance. They delay decisions. They create complexity. They lose track of details. Not because they don't want stability, but because stability doesn't fit the image their nervous system knows how to manage. So the system brings them back to familiar pressure. Again, not punishment. Correction. And here is where most personal development approaches fail. They focus on changing behavior, habits, or mindset without addressing the internal reference point those behaviors are organized around. It's like trying to drive a car faster while the navigation system keeps rerouting you back to the same destination. You can push harder, but the system keeps correcting. This is why insight alone doesn't change people. You can understand everything intellectually and still feel stuck. Because understanding does not update the self-image. Experience does. And not just any experience. Experience that the nervous system registers as safe. This is one of the most misunderstood points in all of self-development. People think change requires intensity, breakthroughs, radical action. But the brain doesn't update identity through intensity. It updates identity through repetition and familiarity. The self-image is not logical. It's conditioned. And conditioning happens gradually. This is why sudden success often destabilizes people. Their nervous system hasn't learned how to be that version of themselves, so the system reverts. But when change happens gradually, when the brain repeatedly experiences a slightly expanded version of identity without threat, the image updates. And once it updates, behavior follows effortlessly. This is what the physician who studied this phenomenon understood deeply. He observed that people don't need to be fixed, they need to experience themselves differently, consistently. Not through affirmations, not through forcing positivity, but through controlled mental rehearsal and lived experiences that align with the new image. Why mental rehearsal works is not mystical. The brain uses imagination as a training ground. When you vividly imagine yourself responding differently, calmer, more confident, more capable, the nervous system rehearses that state. Neural pathways activate. Emotional responses soften. Over time, the brain begins to recognize this version of you as familiar, and familiar becomes safe. This is why athletes use visualization, why musicians rehearse mentally, why surgeons visualize procedures. They are not pretending. They are training the nervous system. But here's the part most people miss. Mental rehearsal only works when it feels believable. If you try to imagine a version of yourself that is too far outside your current self-image, the brain rejects it. It feels fake, unrealistic, uncomfortable. And that discomfort is the signal. Not that it's impossible, but that the nervous system doesn't trust it yet. So the work is not to jump identities. It's to expand them, 1 degree at a time. A slightly calmer response. A slightly more assertive boundary, a slightly different choice. Each one teaches the brain, this version of me is survivable, and survival is the gateway to change. This also explains why people can read the same book, watch the same video, hear the same advice, and only some of them change. The information isn't the difference. The self-image is. People don't change when they understand something. They change when their internal reference point shifts. And this brings us to a very important realization. Most of what you call your personality is not fixed. It's conditioned. It's a collection of learned responses that once helped you adapt. At some point in your life, certain traits became useful. Being quiet, being agreeable, being vigilant, being independent, being invisible, being strong. Those traits became part of the image, and the brain protected them. But what once kept you safe can later keep you small. Not because the brain is outdated, but because it hasn't been shown another option yet. This is why judging yourself never works. Self-criticism only strengthens the old image. It tells the brain, this identity is under attack, and the brain defends harder. Change begins not with judgment, but with observation. Seeing the pattern without becoming it. Noticing the correction without identifying with it. That moment of noticing, that's where freedom starts. Because once you can see the mirror, you are no longer fully inside it. And that's the turning point most people miss. They try to break patterns instead of understanding the system that maintains them. But when you understand the system, you stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, energy frees up. Choices expand. Responses soften. Life begins to feel less heavy. Not because you became someone else, but because the image loosened its grip. Because once you understand how the mirror was built, you no longer try to smash it. You learn how to update it. And that changes everything. Because everything here is about understanding how identity, the brain, and perception shape the life you're living, often without you realizing it. Not quick fixes, not motivation, but the underlying mechanisms that quietly determine behavior, choices, and patterns. If this made you pause for a moment, if something here felt familiar in a way you couldn't quite explain, then this channel will probably resonate with you. Everything here explores how identity, the brain, and perception quietly shape behavior, choices, and life, often without us realizing it. Not as motivation, not as self-help, but as understanding. If you want to keep exploring that, you're in the right place.